Invictus Games slowly being turned into the Meghan Markle show. Yes, last year I posited that the Invictus Games was becoming the Harry and Meghan show, but just a little bit of pictures we have so far from the Invictus Games promotion there in Canada, because it's happening next year. It is very much Meghan Markle's center and display. In fact, at one point, she's barging ahead of Harry, whose event this is. And it raises a huge number of questions. Why is Meghan Markle there? Why is the Invictus Games allowing Meghan and Harry as well to take center stage rather than focusing on the competitors? And I actually have an idea, a theory that I've been working on for a little bit. And because it just seems so counterintuitive. Is the Invictus Games not supposed to be about the veterans, promoting them, raising their profile, instead of seemingly what its actual focus seems to be, which is raising Harry and Meghan's profile? And I think I have an idea of what's going on, especially because last year it very much turned into the Meghan Markle fashion show. And I'm increasingly of the opinion that that is by design. Yes, the Invictus Games is indulging Meghan Markle's need for attention, indulging Harry's need to make her at the center of attention. And the reason why is that I think the Invictus Games has a huge problem brewing behind the scenes. I don't think there's that much interest in it. And not to say that the competitors aren't interested, of course they are. And not to say that governments aren't interested in continuing the games, because of course they are, because it helps their veterans. It's a good PR move for various militaries to be supportive of this endeavor. But no, I think the real truth going on behind the scenes here is that the Invictus Games is essentially losing its audience and potentially losing money as well. And in order to camouflage its lack of an audience, its lack of spectators, they're instead trotting out Harry and obviously Meghan, because the media attention naturally goes to, especially for royal women, goes to their fashion. And so if you put Meghan Markle out there front and center, all of a sudden the attention is on her and Harry, and not necessarily on the competitors anymore, or the lack of spectators. I don't think they can sell tickets. I don't think there's that much interest. And the Invictus Games, instead of addressing the issues that they're having, instead are putting a Band-Aid named Harry and Meghan on it. So we are going to explore this today, because this is something I've been thinking about for a while, and it dawned on me all of a sudden. What if the Invictus Games is using Meghan Markle, and to a certain extent Prince Harry as well, to camouflage the empty seats in the stadium? But if you guys haven't been to Royal News Network, my name is Brittany. I provide compelling royal commentary. So if you guys want to subscribe and learn more about what's going on behind the scenes of royals, we also have some exciting upcoming things as well. You can go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I would love to have you back. We also have a fashion channel dedicated to royal fashion, a newsletter, which I will be working on here very soon. And I also have an upcoming trip to Scotland. So if you want to see the land that Her Majesty loved oh so much, you can hang out with us in Scotland. We'll be going from Edinburgh to the Isle of Skye. You'll be surrounded by other royal fans if you want to talk about Harry and Meghan, Catherine and William, the Queen, King Charles and Camilla. Just so many things we can talk about in the most picturesque place imaginable. So I would love to have you guys sign up there as well. And if you're curious about my jewelry, it is Ana Lucia Diamonds. I got this cute little butterfly necklace, which I thought I lost for a bit, but then I found it. And then I have some earrings here as well. So if you're interested in that, everything will be linked down below. The push for the 2025 Invictus Games has begun, and Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are in Vancouver, Canada to promote the games for 2025. And we're already seeing some really glaring issues with what's going on here. And in particular, we've already seen some chaos going on behind the scenes with the CEO of the 2025 games being dismissed. We also had them still looking for volunteers. And we've also seen that the Invictus Games is starting to ask for donations, which they previously didn't do before. And are these all signs of problems going on behind the scenes? I would argue that yes, it is. I think the Invictus Games is running into a lot of problems, including mission drift. So that's when the initial idea of the organization gets slowly drifted off to the side. But I also think the thing that's continuing to grow and the continuing challenge that's going to have, that's just not seeming to address and actually is camouflaging, is a lack of interest. Unfortunately, I think that the Invictus Games, although it is a fantastic idea, I think there's a lot of support for it. But at the same time, I think its audience is somewhat limited. And I think Harry and Meghan either don't want to accept that reality, or are believing in delusions of their own grandeur, and so they're pushing things in directions that they don't need to go. But then the question becomes, why is the Invictus Games indulging this? Because last time in the Invictus Games in September, I said that they had become the Harry and Meghan show, and now even with the couple of bits we've seen so far in the 2025 promotion, it really just seems like the Meghan show. She's sort of front and center there with Harry. In fact, in a series of pictures, she's actually walking ahead of him when she should be actually hanging to the back and letting him come up to the competitors first, letting him come out of the gate first, because this is his event. She is there merely as a sideshow. She's there merely as a supporting figure. And yet somehow she's seeming to want to dominate the show. And then you additionally have the PDA. They constantly have to be holding hands. There was actually a great Telegraph article talking about how we all know this is performative. We all know it's childish and we all see right through it, yet they continue to do it. But the real question becomes, again, why is the Invictus Games indulging this? Why is the Invictus Games allowing Harry and Meghan to pull the games so far into their own promotional sphere? Because a glaring issue that the Invictus Games has, that it will continue to have, is that it's entirely seemingly personality driven. And what I mean by that is that the Invictus Games, seemingly the pitch to everyone is that this is Harry's game. This is Harry's game. Harry's there. Look, Meghan's there too. Meghan's there too. Don't you want to support because Harry and Meghan are there? But that's not what the Invictus Games is supposed to be about. Because when you think about the Olympics, why do you watch the Olympic Games? There's not a singular person who is the focus of the Olympic Games. No, you watch individual competitors. You watch Michael Phelps because you want to see him smash the next Olympic record. You watch Simone Biles, watch her flip and twist in crazy ways that nobody thought ever was possible for a woman. That's why you watch the Olympic Games. You don't watch it for a singular figure who doesn't even compete. And it seems like that's what the Invictus Games is doing. It's pitching Harry and seemingly even Meghan, who has no role in this or should have no role in this whatsoever, as the reasons why we should be invested in the games. And that just seems to be so incredibly dangerous, because what happens when Harry and Meghan go away? What happens if Harry and Meghan get divorced? Because some people right now who are supporting the Invictus Games do it entirely just because it is a vehicle for Harry and Meghan. They do it for no other reason. Now, I'm supportive of the Invictus Games either way, but the problem is who they have front and center. And again, I came back to and I kept thinking about why, oh why, oh why are they seemingly pushing Meghan in this, and even Harry? Why all of a sudden is Meghan becoming an increasingly huge part in this? She's grabbing the microphone, she's doing that little walk. I mean, other people did it too. It wasn't just Meghan, giving away awards and like really acting like this was her event. I mean, she doesn't even have a side thing. Like if Meghan had a side thing within the games, that would be one thing, but she's seemingly there just to go to the various events and wave and support. And not that that's necessarily wrong, don't get me wrong there, but at the same time, it comes across as sort of odd because Meghan doesn't even wear any Invictus merch. We saw this again yesterday. She didn't wear an Invictus Games beanie. She didn't wear an Invictus Games shirts. Even Harry didn't. It's like, these are your games. You're here to promote them. But we did learn that the beanie Meghan wore was the same one she bought when she was dating Harry. It's from Burberry, because, you know, we all needed to know that. We all needed to know that. That not only was it a beanie Meghan bought before, but it was when she was dating Harry, and we got those paparazzi pictures and it's the same beanie. But again, that's hugely problematic because this is not what the games are supposed to be about. So again, why is this happening? Well, I've come up with a theory, and this is just my theory. I don't have any hard evidence yet to totally support this, but I think this is what's actually happening. I think the Invictus Games is indulging Harry and Meghan because they think it's the only way to sell the games. Because what I don't see a lot of is a really, really good videos, communications on the veterans, the competitors. Nothing like that, as far as I can tell, really exists all that clearly on their various social media spaces, on their various profiles, and they don't even push it. I mean, part of it just gets buried under the Harry and Meghan stuff, which again, should be a huge problem that the games recognizes. But no, they just don't even seem to be able to communicate well who these various veterans are. And obviously, this I think is detrimental to selling the games. Because again, why do people watch the games? They watch the games for the competitors. They don't watch it just to watch Harry and Meghan waving in the stands. To be quite frank, that's boring, except for maybe people like me who like to analyze, like, what does their body language say? What are they doing and everything? But other than that, like, how is that adding? How is that getting more eyes on the games? To a certain extent, I mean, obviously it does. But how is it actually being critical to focusing the games on the veterans? Because that's not what it's doing. I actually just put Invictus games in Google search engine, and the box came up and it was all about Harry and Meghan. It wasn't about the games. Yes, they're there. Yes, they're promoting it. But it had nothing really to do with the games, just that they were there. So again, what is the issue here? Again, why isn't the Invictus Games addressing any of this? My theory is, again, this is my theory, is that the games are using Harry and Meghan to mask empty stands. I don't think people are coming to these games. I don't think they are. And they probably group crowds together and get pictures of Harry and Meghan in the stands. But I don't think they can sell tickets to these games. I don't think they can get anybody in the stands of these games except for friends and family. So what do they do instead? Why, if they focus all the media attention on Harry and Meghan, if they shift everybody to looking at the two of them rather than what's going on behind the scenes, then it masks that these events aren't selling. These events aren't making money. Nobody is coming to these games. And yes, they're still getting support. If you are a Canadian citizen, $15 million of your taxpayer money is going to these games. If you are a British Columbia citizen, an additional $15 million of your taxpayer money are going to these games. Boeing has also announced that it's going to still be a sponsor between 2025 and 2026. But again, it makes sense. Boeing makes military airplanes, so they're like, okay, well, let's focus our charitable efforts on veterans sometimes. You know, that's part of what they do. Governments too are like, well, we send these people out to war, so we should obviously be there to support them. So I understand the mentality, but at the end of the day, these games should be making money. They should not be relying on governments to fund these. And the reason is that it's become a personal promotional vehicle for Meghan and Harry. These games are no longer about the veterans. So why in the world should any taxpayer money ever be paid for two people to promote themselves at the expense of the competitors? It shouldn't. It should not be happening. Because even in Harry and Meghan's own website, where they talk about day one of the games, they mention no single competitor's name. They mention really nothing specific about anything. It's a very banal statement. It's like, but you're there to support the competitors and promote the games. Why aren't you doing that? You're not doing that because all the attention is on you, and government money is being promoted to basically promote them. It's ridiculous. I find it so aggravating that it's become this vehicle for Harry and Meghan rather than a reflection of what's really needed in order to support veterans. And because of that, I think everybody suffers. The competitors suffer, the vendors suffer, because I think, like I said, the empty stand scenario is a huge problem because these games should be making money through a couple of ways. One is merchandise. So I'm actually wearing my Invictus Games 2016 shirt here today. I have worn this. It's actually pretty worn because I like the fit and everything of it. And so I've worn this probably more than Meghan Markle has ever worn any Invictus merch. And I was just there for the game. I have a couple other things. I have a pin and I have a mug. And I went there because I thought it was cool because like a royal was there. And I genuinely was interested in sort of watching the games. And I will say I was there at the opening ceremony. I was there for sitting volleyball and I was there for swimming. I will say right now 100% swimming was dull. I got really bored with the swimming. The sitting volleyball was actually kind of interesting, but swimming was pretty dull. Swimming was pretty dull, I do have to say. But when I was there at that point, I believe I had to pay for each individual event. So I had to pay for the opening ceremonies and we had to pay for sitting volleyball. I went with my sister and swimming. And so I remember paying for those events, but in Dusseldorf, we had this change where Amazon was covering all the costs of the tickets. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, so is that a way to mask how many seats were not sold and that events are not selling out? I think there was a way to do that. There were still tickets available as far as I could tell up until the very last moment for the opening ceremony, the closing ceremony, but those would be the most interesting things. Everything else, is various hit and miss with people. And I think sometimes during some events, really, it only appeals to friends and family members because they know the story. I don't know the story. So if I'm watching someone and they're struggling to get backwards and forwards in the pool, like, I so appreciate it. I so support them, but also I start getting bored because I have no connection to it. I don't know particularly why they're struggling, what they've had to work through to get there, how that has encouraged them and made them fight harder for every little thing. And I feel like that was sort of what it was in the beginning. But as time has gone on, as the Harry and Meghan, and particularly the Meghan show, continues to grow, all of that gets diminished. Harry and Meghan have become a massive dark cloud over the entire Invictus Games because no news stories about the various competitors get out. And I know people say, well, you're not looking for them, but they should be hitting the mainstream press. If they're not, then Harry and Meghan should be mature enough and appreciative enough of this opportunity of the veterans to take a couple of steps back and go, you know what? We want to support the veterans. And so if we are diminishing their voice getting out there, well, then we're fine taking a step back and allowing the veterans to shine rather than trying to steal the spotlight and place it on ourselves. Because that is constantly what Harry and Meghan are doing. They're taking the spotlight that should be on others and pulling it back on themselves. And that's dangerous because these games, I think, only succeed if the focus remains on the veterans. If it doesn't, I think eventually people will get bored and they'll look somewhere else. And I think that's already happening because these games, nothing else gets out about these games. I don't hear anything. And again, you could argue, well, that was what the Heart of Invictus was for. Yeah, it was. But who did the Heart of Invictus start off with? It started off with Prince Harry talking about himself. I'm a father, I got 2 dogs, yada, yada, yada. I got kids, I got a wife, and I was like, okay, how is that the Heart of Invictus? And then it was like a bit about, talking to his friends about how he had the idea for this and how he was encouraged to do X and stuff like that. And I was like, well, that's really self-indulgent. And while Harry's voice sort of diminished as things went on, we focused on a couple of different competitors. And I will say I had criticisms because some of the competitors, one of them, he lost his arm in a motorcycle accident that was not related to military service. And so the pitch for the Invictus Games, the brand for the Invictus Games, is that these are particularly for veterans who have been injured in combat. Now, yes, other people can compete, not saying that at all. But if the Heart of Invictus truly is to help those who have been impacted by combat service, why didn't we see somebody impacted by combat service rather than something like a lot of people experience, which is a motorcycle accident? Why can't other people who have been in motorcycle accidents and impacted compete in the games as well? Because I think it confuses the true purpose of the games. And there was also another guy they focused on who really seemed to already have a decent amount of psychological issues before becoming a member of the military service. He had a lot of attachment issues. And yes, those were exacerbated by his combat. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, I think it would be much more compelling to see somebody who was perfectly and completely functional. They had no issues going through combat and then suffering with immense PTSD. And I think that's important because, again, my mind goes, okay, I see the cost of service. But that guy, I'm thinking, well, I feel sorry for you. I'm glad you're at these games. But at the same time, I'm like, it sounds like you just had a lot of issues beforehand. Your combat exacerbated that. And so, okay. Again, it was the lack of direction for Heart of Invictus that I think really sunk it. And nobody really watched. We don't have exact numbers yet, so I can't say for sure. But it never made it into the top 10. But Harry and Meghan, also, again, because it needs to be their program, their show, especially Meghan's. Meghan wants to shine, is that they need to get a broadcasting deal out of the Invictus Games. The problem is that ain't going to happen, or at least it shouldn't happen with a really smart business person. It shouldn't happen. Why? Because you can't even give it away for free. The Invictus Games has YouTube channels. All of them are pretty low, and all of them have pretty low viewing figures, including the Dusseldorf Games. Yes, they've slowly increased, but they're also pretty low as well. So the Invictus Games Foundation has 3,063 subscribers and 147 videos. And I just don't think even these videos are being that watched. There, What We Do only has 6,309 views. And next we have Invictus Australia, which was in 2019, right after Harry and Meghan's wedding. Only 409 subscribers, 211 videos. We have the Invictus Games The Hague, 1,530 subscribers, 217 videos. And Harry's speech only got 23,000 views, and the opening ceremony, closing ceremony, 14,000. And let me tell you right now, I always exceed those numbers on my videos. And they have Harry there to drive it. It should be doing better, right? And then we have Dusseldorf 2023. Now, they did get a boost. They got 7,350 subscribers, and they had 140 videos. But again, the closing ceremony got 71,000 views. Harry's closing speech only got 58,000. So again, pretty good, but definitely not great considering the profile Harry and Meghan have. And then we got Whistler, 346 subscribers so far, 6 videos, all of them very, very diminished. Now, let's compare this really briefly to Prince Harry's and Michelle Obama's speeches at the Invictus Games Orlando opening ceremony. This was 7 years ago in 2016. And obviously you have huge names. This was part of the Royal Family Channel, and they had 284,000 views. So I think the interest generally has diminished in these games, and I don't think they can sell them, and they want to. So here's what this was buried at the bottom of a Telegraph article.
Hey guys, Editing Brittany here. As I was looking at this, I realized I read broadcast when it said broadest. So I was slightly wrong there, but I still think they're looking for a broadcast deal for sure. So let me go ahead and read you guys the full quote again. It says, one of my top priorities is to make sure we get the broadest possible audience all around the world. There'll be more on that in the coming weeks.
And this was from the new CEO. Now, again, the problem there is if your subscriber base is that small on your general channels and your watch is so small as well, why in the world would a broadcast company pay to broadcast this? In addition, I think what Harry and Meghan want probably is like what they do with the Olympics, having different commentators and all these sorts of things, which is a huge amount of resources for a network to do with likely very little return. The truth here is that the Invictus Games has a naturally rather small audience. This is not going to be a huge audience. This is going to be a niche audience, because sometimes, especially when I watch the swimming, I felt like, well, if I was a family member or a friend, I would care, but as a spectator, I just don't find it that engaging. And that is what I think the Invictus Games knows. So what are they going to do? Why bring out Meghan Markle and make it a fashion show? Because all the focus goes all of a sudden to Meghan Markle's fashion show. So empty stands probably get ignored. I don't even think anybody really did an investigation on that. If you don't have any people outside, let's say military, family, friends attending, that sort of gets ignored too, because, oh, Meghan Markle, ooh, she's wearing a dress, she's wearing a shirt. No Invictus Games merch, of course, because the purpose for her is not to promote the Invictus Games. The purpose, again, is to promote herself. It's the Meghan show. She needs to promote Meghan. She doesn't really care about the games. She just needs to promote Meghan. It's the Meghan show. And again, the Invictus Games, I think, indulges this, because then they can scapegoat. They can avoid their own glaring issues going on behind the scenes. And I find that incredibly sad and tragic. The Invictus Games can be, I think, hugely influential and grown to something really huge. Yes, it started with Harry, and because of that, now it has brand recognition, but needs to let Harry and Meghan go, because they're dragging it down, because all they want to do is promote themselves at the expense of the competitors. They're not really giving us great insight into these competitors. Thought the heart of Invictus was not very good. It was boring and meandering at times. I found certain parts of it compelling and other parts boring and meandering, and it lacked a cohesive narrative. It should have been either, and I posited this after I watched it, it should have either been about Ukraine, it should have been about the struggle to get the Hague Games on, or it should have been about Harry, you could say. Because those three things were all sort of competing together. And so it's like, okay, so what's the point? What is the heart of Invictus? Again, they couldn't really say. And I don't think that really worked as a promotional vehicle for the games, which it should have. It should have worked as a promotional vehicle to support the games, but it hasn't. And I think, again, the competitors love it, and I think it's good, and I think it should continue. But I don't think governments should be on the hook for continuing it, because if it's all about Harry and Meghan, I think the veterans are getting lost. And so if they can't make it about the veterans again, then they either need to scrap the games altogether, or they need to scrap their patrons. And I think it would be much better to scrap their patrons and really focusing on promoting the individual people behind it, all the various competitors. Now, you could say the reason they don't is that a lot of these people crave privacy, which I understand, but it should be understood as well that if you are competing in these games, part of it is that you share your story. Part of it is that you are interviewed, unless there is a particular situation. But if you're competing in these games, the reason people want to watch is for you. But again, I don't think the Invictus Games is thinking that anymore. In fact, one of the most compelling storylines I thought of in the Invictus Games documentary was a man from South Korea who lost his hands after I think he had an accident while on active duty. And it was like dealing with munitions or something. He had an accident, lost his hands. But he talked about how in South Korea, it's considered pretty shameful to have a disability like his. And so he has to help his daughter on how to talk with her friends, make sure she is not ashamed of him. I'm like, oh my gosh, that is such an interesting story. But they hardly focused on it. Like, I wanted to watch him. Every time he was on, I was like, yes, I want to hear your story, because that's an interesting and compelling piece. It's not just about the injury. It's about how other people perceive you. And he had a lot of great points, which I loved. And yet somehow he was one of the least focused people in that entire documentary. And I was like, what a loss, what a waste to miss out on sharing his story, I think, in particular, because people do feel those things. But again, the games are no longer about that. If they could just get back to focusing on the veterans, I don't think they'll need Harry and Meghan. That's the thing. The Olympic Games does not need a central figure, but for some reason the Invictus Games does. And I think that is by design, because it's fear of losing out on Harry and Meghan. And in particular, I think it's Harry and Meghan also desperately clinging to the Invictus Games because it's the only thing that still gives them some validity on the international stage. So guys, let me know what you think of this video. Let me know what you think of my theory about Meghan and the Invictus Games. I'd love to get your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.